Hi, I'm Zoe Lister-Jones. I am a filmmaker, most recently acted in the film Beau Is Afraid and created the Roku original series Slip, which you can watch all of now at the RokuChannel.com.
Hi, my name is Emma Seligman. I am also a filmmaker, and I most recently directed a movie called Bottoms that will come out later this summer.
Yay.
I was also going to add, you created, wrote, directed, acted in every episode of Slip. To clarify, for anyone who doesn't know.
Thank you, Emma.
Which is so wildly impressive. I guess I don't know if you want to talk first, but I wanted to ask you how you were able to do that, on top of just directing, which is just such a tiring experience in and of itself.
No, it's a great question. And I'm just want to say I'm so excited to be talking to you. And it's I'm nervous because I'm such a fan of yours, and Letterboxd asked who I would want to be in conversation with as a filmmaker. And I was just Emma, even though I've never met you. But just because, I'm so deeply impressed by your filmography, and Shiva Baby was one of those movies that I saw and was mad that I didn't make. I have so many questions for you, but I'll start by answering yours. I think I started making films as a writer, producer, actor with my ex-husband. And so that was sort of boot camp that allowed for me to really learn how a few of those roles could be executed simultaneously. And then it took me a while to really, I guess, gain the confidence to believe that I could also direct, which is partially why I look at someone like you, with such awe and admiration, who really had that confidence so young, and that the singularity of your voice was so clear in such a ambitious and incredible first feature, and now amazing second feature. But yeah, it took me a while. I made a film called Band-Aid that I wrote, directed, and starred in, and that was really the first time that I put into practice those three things, which was my first feature as a director, which was also sociopathic to try to do all of that, because it's overwhelming. It's an overwhelming amount of responsibility. But I do think that those three things in particular are so exciting to do at once. It's an extreme sport. As a person who's never played a sport, it's what I imagine an extreme sport to be just the adrenaline and the immediacy of directing from within the belly of the beast, and not having any of the filters that one might have just doing one of those roles, of being once removed or twice removed. This is there's no removal. And there's nowhere to hide. And I think that level of exposure as a person who is pretty fearful by nature is something that I guess I like to push myself to do. And I think they all are very holistic. To have those three things in conversation feels weirdly organic. It's actually weirder for me to do just one of them.
Yeah, I was going to ask, well, first of all, that's so kind of you to say what you said up top. And that means so much to me, because I'm such a huge fan of yours ever since Lola Versus. And I love your work so much. But do you find it easier to approach directing from the place of acting? Is that your first sort of way into understanding how to tell a story, or how to sort of capture realism in the moment, especially because so much of your work is so grounded and truthful, and I feel is telling stories of everyday life that I can feel and see all around me. And I mean, it's so cool to see you act in something as wild and crazy as Beau Is Afraid, and then also see your work, which is so grounded, even though Slip plays with reality in such a fun way. But is it easier for you to sort of access directing from a place of I understand how to be in the scene, and now I just need to sort of craft it around that?
Oh, that's such a good question. One of the cool things about directing a scene that I'm acting in is that I have access to so many tools that I wouldn't otherwise if I weren't also performing. And that one of my favorite things about that is like molding my actor's performance through my own performance. Because it's like it's a sneaky little trick. But it's really like fun.
Yeah.
I think it allows for both me and my scene partner to be in the moment in a way that is always the sort of holy grail as an actor, is to find that sense of sort of immediacy, because I as an actor can throw things at my scene partner that might, shift something or even knock them a little off balance, then something can be like cracked open, I think. Similarly to your style, which I have lots of questions about, like trying to create grounded worlds and performances within those worlds is always like a director's biggest challenge. And I think that is something that, as an actor, I like to sort of, I guess, shape also, like, and that they do sort of go hand in hand. But I think also, I don't know if, wait, have you acted?
You know what? I haven't, except I just did my friend's like short film recently. And I was like, I was kind of helping them direct it because they both acted and directed it in it as well. I was sort of like a backseat director per their request. And I found it really hard to both be in the moment and remain objective. And I think just because I acted as like a kid and did theater, but I've never directed myself in anything. So that's why I'm so curious when I see actors approach directing, because I'm like, is this sort of their way? And, because I feel like directing has so many facets. So some people come from cinematography, or some people start off as a writer, or some people start off, I don't know, doing production design. And so they're able to sort of ground themselves in one element and then like go off from there. But I found it challenging to, because sometimes you're in the moment and you're like, that felt really good. And then the director's like, that was off. Or sometimes you're like, that felt awful. And everyone was like, we found it. And so I just like always I'm in awe of people who direct themselves, because I feel like you must be doing it in your own way, but people who can do it well, I just find really impressive. So, but what you're saying about sort of finding the truth while you're in it and playing with your scene partner, being deep in it, sounds so cool and personal. Because I feel like sometimes when you're directing a scene and you're not acting in it, the actors can feel like, I don't know, there was something missing there. And you're like, you're like, I wasn't in the moment with you guys, like actually.
Yeah,
so
totally. And
I'm a one layer removed,
I've directed things that I haven't acted in, and I've found that, that part challenging. Also, I think there is something about like, it's such a vulnerable thing to be on camera.
Yeah.
And I think to put that question of like, well, I thought we got it, but we didn't, or I don't feel good, but you do, that disconnect between performer and director is always an interesting one. There is kind of more implicit trust when your director is right there with you and can be like, no, I was a foot away from your face. We don't got it. No, or whatever. Or we do have it and you can trust me, or any of those things. But it is, I think the wildness of that experience is contagious. And I think that it does sort of set a tone for the other actor in the scene to be like, we're both going on a pretty crazy ride right now. And to me, I think that is something I want to talk to you about, because I know you have such a close relationship with Rachel, and you use sort of the same players sometimes, and what that relationship is in terms of creating those stories and sort of world building with your actors.
Like every story, I think I continue to try within, just both those projects. And I hope going forward to come back to whatever my goal is, whatever I'm trying to say or whatever I'm trying to create, and have everything build off of that in every department. I think that no matter what you're doing, it starts from like the truthfulness, between the actors, and then into the edit, like tracking the story that your characters have. I found it much harder to do actually in Bottoms, because it's such a crazy comedy. but it's so important. I think the best comedies, like when you really look deep within, have a really important story, or really a story with, solid character development underneath all of, the improv or whatever it is. I think that like when I got into the edit on Bottoms, like for example, like my editor had created a really wonderful, lovely, funny cut, but I felt like I kind of had to deconstruct it with her to make sure I understood the characters' motivations in each scene and the story. And for a second, we were like, this is getting not funny. Like you're choosing all these like random looks between people. Because I just wanted it to be clear to myself. Because sometimes, like as you know, you have to redirect those things when you're in the edit. It becomes its own movie or its own episode or show. Like, and it takes on a life of its own, and you have to find whatever that cocktail is. In terms of my approach, like I just try to keep going back to that North Star of what it is. What am I trying to do here? And with Shiva, it was like, oh my God, I almost forget because I feel like I processed it and blacked it out. But it was something like creating a story for young women that like, young women to feel seen in their search for validation in sex or something like that. And then for Bottoms, I just wanted to create like a gay teen movie I could have seen in high school. Create a movie I could have seen in high school in general. And so I just like kept going back to like, what can I relate to within this, and how can I show that?
And what's your casting process like? Because you had a previous, like, did you and Rachel go to school together, or what was the beginning of that collaboration?
We both went to NYU, but I didn't meet her until she like auditioned for the short film that Shiva Baby's based on, which I made in school. And we took ourselves so seriously, but she like auditioned for my short in like a dorm basement.
What dorm? Shout it out.
It was 2nd Street or 3rd Street, something like that. It wasn't my dorm. It was like they had
3rd North.
It wasn't 3rd North. It was like, I want to say 2nd Ave. God. It was a dorm that I like didn't know really existed. And then they had a basement people rented out for like
interesting
auditions and stuff. So we were there. I was there with my casting director. I was like 21. It was so silly. But I mean, she was just so good in the audition. And then I got to know her and I was like, oh my God, she's so ambitious. Like this girl like really means business. Like she really wants to make stuff and means it. And it's, as I'm sure, you've found, like it's rare to find someone who's actually like committed to setting goals and meeting them. And it, can be so hard to be self-motivated. So, that was the beginning of our collaboration. And she's so funny and she's a stand-up comic. So then we just started writing Bottoms together. We kind of like figured it out over a whiteboard of like, what kind of story do we want to tell? But
the cast of Bottoms is so amazing.
Yeah.
I'm friends with Io.
I want to say thank you, but but they're not there. But I can't take credit for them.
You absolutely can.
Yeah, they're amazing.
But
you're friends with
I'm
Io.
friends with Io, and Nick Galitzine was in The Craft Legacy, which and he's like a dreamboat and very funny, and I really I loved the way that you portrayed the jocks. Like, I mean, I love the way that you subverted so many tropes in Bottoms, but directorially, I was really interested in that choice, especially with the way that you constructed those meatheads to be sort of so beta as they were trying to be alpha.
Initially, when we were creating the characters, we were just like, let's just make fun of like football towns and toxic masculinity and how these guys can get away with anything. But I think once we cast Nick and Miles and these other football characters, we just found the funniest versions of their performances were when, especially for Nick in particular, was when he was, I think it felt a little reductive, but when I was like, act like a 4-year-old or act like a monkey. And I think he just really when Jeff couldn't get what he wanted, he became upset.
Yeah.
And I think we just really had fun in sort of directing the performances and making them really dramatic. And Rachel's so funny. So things like when they were like jumping off the cars to like get to him, were just like little details that we thought would be fun to do. And then I think that when we were done it, some people remarked like, that they're so, they're beta, or they're like, we're flipping everything on its head. And I think we just wanted to make them dramatic in that anytime they didn't get what they wanted, you know what I mean? They were pouty or
tantrum.
They put a tantrum, and then they get what they want. And so I guess we just like pushed that hard. And Nick was so game for like playing such a ridiculous character. And and to honestly be in the backseat of this mostly female focused story, they understood the role they were playing in this world. And that took some humility for sure. It was just fun to sort of direct something so stupid with them. I think everyone else, I think they understood the backbone of their characters. You know what I mean? Like their goals were really clear. And versus some of the girls in their characters, like it's sort of, they're on this journey of finding their confidence and their popularity. And so you have to track that a little bit more and sort of find the ebb and flow of how they're feeling within the scenes. But for Nick and Miles, it was like pretty clear. And so we could just like totally go wild with their performances.
Yeah. I mean, that's a question I have for you, because especially when you're making like a high school film, which is such a specific genre, like you are playing with these tropes and these sort of archetypes that then you're flipping on their heads in many ways. But I am interested in directorially, like how you are modulating tone in terms of performance when it comes to like actors playing these archetypes, and how you wanted them, like how do you as a director sort of like to just get a lot of different versions in terms of how broad your strokes are in performance so that you can play in the edit? Or are you pretty clear on tone on the day?
I think tone is the hardest thing, no matter what you're doing. Like I find that it's so hard from the development of the characters up until the edit, up until the music, like up until the last final stages. It's I think it's never, there's never a point where I'm like, we got it. We got the tone. And I think that showing different cuts of the edit help with that. Because often there's, whether you're showing it to friends or there's like official test screenings, like people are like, I didn't get the tone. It's kind of campy, but it's kind of grounded. So I think it's a journey. Like I definitely like to get different performances, but I think that like it became clear as we were doing it. Like I definitely felt like Rachel and I felt like, in terms of the casting process, we wanted to pick actors that were super grounded in their characters, that were like, I'm committed to my character's goal within this crazy, ridiculous world, even though my character's saying and doing crazy things. Like I buy them, I believe them, I root for them. And that to me is when we got the funniest performances. But definitely, I feel like when we were doing it, we found like, okay, Io and Rachel definitely, especially Io's character, are really more like the straight men, quote unquote. And everyone else, like, like Havana and Kaya would have questions like, should I play it bigger? Should I be broader? And I would just try to like, I think the instinct was to always just like be as committed, just be as grounded and believe your character as much as you can. Because everyone was aware of the world and the tone being so crazy, but I was like, try to just sort of stay dropped in. And usually that was right. But then sometimes, it is a dance. Definitely. I wanted to ask you about tone and themes. Like I'd never seen something so like a story about depression and existentialism that was so specifically female and revolving around this concept of self-love. And having this character try to find acceptance or self-love or her perfect sort of like, self-cared like life into these worlds, which I think I feel like at least in my life and in my friend's life is like a really dangerous concept to be thrown around, is like putting us on this sort of endless journey of trying to find self-love, which like, I love when the friend character says to her, like, what kind of crazy person or kind of psycho, like loves themselves. And I guess I just wanted to ask, like, it's really hard to tell a story about existentialism and depression in a way that's not bumming out your audience and not being preachy. And obviously Beau Is Afraid is very nihilistic and existential. how can you sort of funnel your experiences or feelings around these themes and topics in terms of how you relate to it in your own life into something? Are you consciously like, how do I make this funny and make sure that it isn't like, sad and depressing, or how do I make this inventive and new? And then also like, do you, when you're acting in something that has similar themes to the stories you're directing, do they influence you, or do they make you see where yours stands in the world of sort of nihilistic existential?
I'm going to do the distinctly like female filmmaker thing. I'm just being like, thank you so much. I don't know how not to do that. It's so nice.
You know what? Maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe we should. It's okay to just say thank you all the time, and we can normalize it.
My therapist, and I have more than one, I'll say that an antidote to my depression is a gratitude practice. So here we go. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for you. And for all of your kind words. And I do think it is important because it's like, it's rare that we get to have these kinds of conversations in such depth with like fellow filmmakers, and especially fellow filmmakers whose work we so admire. And I think, I see so many similarities between our work and the sort of worlds that we're looking to build. And so it does mean a lot. And then I will answer your question. I guess I always make the things that I'm like wanting to see. And the things that I'm wanting to see are, I think, probably existentialist at their core, and sort of asking larger and harder questions that I don't know how to answer. I think that is what I try to do as a filmmaker, is just like try to answer them for myself, because clearly all the therapy isn't working. but every film or series that I like go to make, I'm like looking for a new way into a sort of age-old question, and sort of looking how I can find the most singular route towards like a sort of universal query, like which is something that I so admire about your work. Like that you're also exploring these like really important and big themes in such like specific containers. And that's what I always want to be watching. So yeah, I think with acting, like Beau Is Afraid is, yeah, it's
you're so good in it. Like you're just so incredible. You're doing like a young Patty without it being a caricature either. Like it's like so grounded and truthful, and yet you're like, this is the same person, younger.
Oh man, thank you. I mean, listen, it's like a really tall order to have to play Patty Lupo, and also such a like gift to as my job have to study all of Patty's intricacies. But I think that is a testament to Ari Aster as a director, and it was really cool to study him, like because I made Beau Is Afraid before Slip. And so I was definitely watching Ari through a pretty specific lens of just like, how does he master tone? Because he is, really navigating such wild swings. And I think also how he navigates performance, because it's sort of what we were talking about with Bottoms, but like when you are taking such big swings tonally, it is really only in performance that you're going to ground the audience into emotional arcs. And so I think I just took that really seriously, and Ari was helpful in making sure, because like that character could have been quite arch, like and quite villainous at her surface. And I think anytime I leaned into that, Ari would always shift me back and to find her humanity. And that was such an interesting lesson, because like obviously once Patty is revealed, she gets to sort of have the big fun villainous leads like, a third act. But for me, it's like, I think it was much more about, walking a narrower line where we didn't know how to feel about her. I had a question for you about your cinematographer and how you sort of like what the conversations were going from a film like Shiva Baby to a film like Bottoms, because they're stylistically quite different. And also sort of in a larger context, like going from making something indie and small, and that's very much yours, to something that's at a larger scale and within a studio system, like what those conversations were like and what pressures you felt in taking that step. Because a second feature is always so scary, at least it was for me. Especially when your first feature is opening a lot of doors, like how to both, like, I guess, meet the expectation of leveling up while still staying sort of authentic to your roots.
Yeah, those are such good questions. And I already know how I'm going to segue because I have the same. No, I mean, I love, I think that like, finding, and, you know this probably, like, you find the DP you love the most and you want to like spend your time with as a person, because it is such a marriage. And then go from there. Like, I think that it's wonderful to know that your DP has done something in the style that you want to do. But I think it's not more important to know that they can pivot and that they can take your vision and make the best version of it with their ideas they bring to the table. And I have nothing but I could talk about my DP, Maria Rusci, like for hours on end. Like she's just a funny, wonderful person to work with, but also like is willing to put in so much time to understand my intent, like on a story level and tonal level. And there's so much more behind the words, that you're going for that isn't always obvious to your department heads. I mean, you have to communicate that. So honestly, like, I think the thread between Shiva and Bottoms was just watching a ton of references with her and sharing references that I had, and then her taking that and downloading that in her brain, and then her sharing references with me. To be quite honest, like there were some folks at the studio that were a little hesitant about bringing Maria on because she didn't have the experience of doing a big studio movie. She'd definitely been on set a million times, working within camera and lighting. But, they ended up being like, wow, we really, they ended up saying yes, first of all, and letting me make the decision, which was wonderful. But then second to that, they ended up saying like, we were wrong. And we were so amazed by Maria, and it was a wonderful sort of full circle moment. But I was getting anxious because I was like, if I don't have her, I don't know what able to do, and I know she can do this. And it was pretty impressive to watch like this young woman run a crew of 100 or so people, with such grace and just confidence. And to answer your second question in combination with that, like I found it incredibly hard to make the jump. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to like Orion and MGM for like believing in me, but emotionally and like physically, like more than anything, I found it challenging. I think the best thing you can do is just prep. That for me, like, just shot listing as much as possible with Maria, like really grounded me in understanding what we were doing and what we needed to achieve that day. But I found it quite hard. I mean, her and I had to choreograph the fighting together, and I'd never done stunts or anything before. I was quite shocked by just like how much of a big step it would be. I knew it was going to be a big step, but I was like, it was really tough to be honest. And I think that, as I'm sure it was for you, and I think that it grounded me whenever I talked to a mentor of mine who was like, yeah, that makes sense that it's hard right now and that you're freaking out a little bit. And I guess I kind of throw that question back to you because I don't really have many. I was realizing as I was listening to my mentors they were all like, fuck that. Like, you know, like you're the director, like hire them or like whatever it was. And I was like, they're all men. I was like, really realizing all my directing mentors are men. And which is not to say that every now and then a little dose of that is helpful because you're like, right, boss.
But that blind confidence.
Exactly. Of like, I'm a leader here. But I guess I kind of throw a two-hander back to you in that, you know, what was it like making the jump for you from Band-Aid to craft? And like, how do you weather the storm? Like, I just find that like not enough. I don't think people talk about how hard directing is because, you know, you don't want to make it sound like the production was hard. You know what I mean? Or like there was stuff that went down. There was drama. It's just a hard job. And so I wonder if that's also because traditionally it's been a male job that people don't talk about, like how emotionally and physically taxing it is, especially when you make the jump. And so I guess I'm always curious to know, maybe this isn't like the sexiest question, but like, how do you take in this question, even though we're bringing back to self-love, self-care, even though that's a dangerous idea, like I mentioned before, but how did you make that jump and how do you stay afloat and take care of yourself or do you not and just sort of roll?
Well, with Band-Aid, I hired all women as my crew. There wasn't a single man on set outside of the actors. And I think I did that because I had witnessed some of the double standards that women behind the camera experienced, and also just the profound inequity of women, especially below the line.
Yeah.
And such a supreme lack of representation, I think precisely because of what you're saying, because if someone doesn't have the experience, they'll never be given the experience. And that's why the system is so professionally broken. And when you hear those stories of someone like you fighting for, you know, a female DP who is getting pushback to say, I know they can do it. Like it is those people like yourself who are suddenly in a position of being able to shift hiring practices. But it does really take a strong will, especially when you yourself are just gaining experience, you know, to say, well, you have to trust me. It's like, but you're a first-time studio filmmaker. So it takes like chutzpah. I think on Band-Aid, it was interesting because even my female department heads were pretty apprehensive, some of them, to hire women in their departments, just because like they had working relationships with men that were going to make them feel safer and were going to make their work shine. And at the end of the day, all of the fear that serves as like a barrier to entry, I think for women, especially below the line, is really just about people wanting to do their best work. Like, I don't think it's malicious, you know, intentionally, but I think that that's like sort of where we have to like trip the wires, because I think that when people who don't have the same amount of experience on their resume are given opportunities, they're so much hungrier. And I think that level of mentorship, it was really interesting on Band-Aid to see because we shot it in 12 days, you know, the stakes were very high. Like that's not a time frame for mentorship in most people's minds. Yeah. But it totally worked. And that was such a like revelation to be like, yeah, like people can learn very quickly on a job. And especially with the right mentors and department heads who are, you know, just throwing them like being thrown into this sort of a lion's den, so to speak, like does create this incredible energy on a set.
Yeah.
And it is such a testament to like not looking at those hires as risks, but as like opportunities to find great new artists, which is like what you did, you know, when you brought your DP into Bottoms. And now that she has that on her resume, she now is going to have 1,000 more doors open. I had a similar experience actually when I brought my DP from Band-Aid onto this ABC pilot, because I got so much pushback. She had never directed a pilot. I mean, DP'd a pilot before, and I had never directed one. So I, again, was not really in the position to be like, swinging my dick around. And, but I did. I swung that dick, swung it till it knocked a couple people right over, and I got her on the team. Yeah, it is such an interesting lesson that I think is still not put into practice nearly enough. I think there's so much dialogue around equity and hiring practices, but that we're still up against a lot of the same barriers, because I think everyone is just wanting to do such a good job. And I think it is like, let's look at at how much better that job could be if more people could come and be, admitted into these worlds.
Totally. I mean, you mentioned this earlier, but it is that thing of, if you don't get the opportunity, when are you going to get the opportunity to make the next? I think that sometimes people feel like, well, and not even on a studio level, but everyone and directors, et cetera, like, it's like, well, I made it here and I'm a young woman. So that should be enough. That's enough change, like that's we're good, but it's actually, I feel like in these moments where you need to be like, haha, I'm here, and therefore I'm going to bring on as I can, or whoever it is that you want.
Even just seeing the difference there when I tried to bring those hiring practices into that next project, it became like a question for HR, because then suddenly I was not letting men in to, in a way that then I was being questioned in terms of those practices. And so I think once it just when it came to like those next opportunities where I was being given opportunities to work within the studio system, I was just faced with a whole other, skew of challenges just in that department. And then there are 1,000 other departments that you're then faced with challenges. But it's hard how much to say in these conversations. But it was extremely challenging to go from having so much agency to having so little as a filmmaker. And I think, especially because I think you were also shifting genres, but I think got to stay a little bit more true to your core and take some more risks. Like I did such a pivot in genre, and in a genre I had never worked in before. And like you, I had never done stunts. I had never done VFX. Like I had never done any of these things that were being asked of me, which in many ways is cool, right? To be given those opportunities, but it's so overwhelming. I think especially as women to be given those opportunities and to go, I really better not fuck this up, because then I'm just going to play into every terrible stereotype that keeps us from getting a seat at these tables.
Yeah. And then you're like, oh, and then I'm going to fuck it up for all of us, if I can't.
No pressure.
But no pressure.
I'm doing this animated movie. I'm like a voice in an animated movie that Ron Howard is directing. And I was asking him, because he was talking about that he's had Final Cut like forever. And that and that like now he gets more notes now. I'm speaking out of school, but it was something like he gets more notes now, even with Final Cut, than he did back in the day when he didn't have Final Cut, when he was a younger filmmaker. And I thought that was so interesting. Yeah. And I was just asking him like how to navigate that. I think that's like the question that I always ask when filmmakers are leveling up into this system where decisions are being made so much more by committee and are so often fear-based, with commerce in mind, which is sort of anathema to art making, but is our job to always be like straddling those two worlds of art and commerce, that like how to trust your gut when you're being given no's. Because I think especially as women, we are conditioned to be such team players and want to please and question, gut instincts, by those who might have more experience. And I think I really learned from the craft to not do that.
Yeah.
Like, so like, and it doesn't mean to not take notes seriously. Like I love feedback, and I think like friends and family screenings are my favorite version of that, because it's not this sort of like harrowing like test screening audience that then is like crunching numbers. It's like people who you respect and trust, and you can like digest notes or thoughts that might be hard to swallow, but also see if they come up with a number of different people or a number of different screenings. Like, okay, this is something I really need to look at, even though it's my favorite scene or whatever that is. Like, and I'm a huge advocate of that as a filmmaker, but I think it's also important to really listen when there's something in you that's just saying like, that is not the movie or that is not the show. And I really need to stick to my gut and to my vision in pushing back on that. And it's that line that I was sort of asking Ron Howard about, like, how do you navigate that, when you're playing in the big leagues?
Yeah, because it's not necessarily good to be like, fuck all that. You know what I mean? Like what we think maybe would be the worst sort of version of a man's response of like, let's stop testing me, like it is good to listen and receive feedback. And I feel lucky that I feel like, at least with Bottoms, like I was working with Orion, which is all young women and a group of young queer diverse women. And I did trust their notes, but I was just so not used to so many cooks in the kitchen that I was like, wait, what even is the director's cut versus like, why can't I just be working on this on my own for longer, but there's more money on the line and there's a system and it's every time you have to try to like remind yourself that it's not your money. You know what I mean? That's like an opportunity. But it's just such a jump. I remember like hearing Christopher Nolan say something about like how his first movie was like his mom was like making sandwiches, like it was like so indie and small. And then he made Memento for like $4 million or something. And he said something like, I'll never make a bigger jump. Like I'll never have a bigger jump in my life. And that made me feel like hopeful. You know what I mean? Like, okay, maybe just the indie to the studio jump, that's the hardest. And even little things where I was like, what's a playback guy? Like
right. Totally.
That's such a like, it's like a union rule to have someone specifically for playback, and you can't just do it on the camera or with your DP or whatever it is. And so I was just like constantly also like learning things and being like, wow, what's that going on over there? Or like, what is base camp? I'm sure like Band-Aid. I mean, I know that you acted in a million things before, but I was like, why aren't my actors just here in front of me? Like, where are they?
Totally. It is such a good, it's such a good lesson, I think, though, for especially young women filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers, because I feel like a big part of why it took me so long to believe I could direct was because I didn't think I knew enough. And I think that is sort of distinctly female, like to want to just be perfect, and especially in industries where there is a lack of representation, to think like, well, I have to have every answer if I'm asked, or else, I'll be like a laughing stock, but B, like people will just believe that I am the imposter that I might believe myself to be already. And I think it is like so important to hear these stories of like, I didn't know a lot of things and I learned them on the job. And that is 100% what everybody is doing at every level. Like, I'm sure as Chris Nolan is elevating like to, from 4 million to 170 million or whatever, it's like, he's got lots of things he's never done before, but he's figuring it out. And like, that is, I think, like the beauty of what we do is that like, it is a communal act, and you are surrounding yourself with people who can teach you and who you can ask questions to. And that's like, I think actually such a unifying way of making work, like where there isn't that kind of hierarchy, where it is more of like, let's all talk about what the answer to this question is together and how we can like achieve the vision that I set out to achieve, but I might not know how to execute just yet.
Do you feel like when you're, because I have such imposter syndrome, but I also feel like the female director thing where I'm like, no one's going to take me seriously. Like I walk on almost with like a stiffness because I'm like, I didn't notice it as much on Shiva, and then I noticed it on Bottoms, and I was like, what am I doing? I'm like forcing this, but I found it a little trickier at the beginning to let my guard down and sort of be a little bit more trustworthy of the people that I hired and wanted to bring on. Do you find that circling back to the acting of it all, like, do you find that you sort of just have to let go and trust your AD and your DP and everyone around you a little bit more behind the monitor that's like watching, visually what's going on when you're in the scene? Or, is that just sort of, you always just like, it's the same thing as when you did the craft, or, like is it a little bit different?
Yeah, it is different. I mean, I think like you, like prep is just so important to me, especially when I'm acting and directing. If I sort of run it again, never played a sport, barely watched one, but it's what I imagine they do in like football, where you're just like running the plays over and over again. Like, because so many things can go wrong in a day, I like want to know what the plan B and C's are, so that, especially like with Slip, we shot it in 36 days. So it was like also really a compact schedule. And so I think like as much as I like always want, I really set out on Slip to be able to enjoy the process, because I think on the craft, there was such a focus on making the days, which is so important, but it also can overtake your other focuses, which is just like the art you're trying to make. And so with Slip, that experience was very helpful because I could bring it into Slip and go, I know how to make my days, and I can trust myself a little more, that I can lean into the joys of creation and sort of playing in the, proverbial sandbox a little bit more. But yeah, I do think it does take a lot of trust. And it also takes like a lot of very specific communication leading up to production, so that everyone's so clear on what the vision they're executing is. And I'm always like, we're not stopping unless something's going terribly awry. Right. But like, we all know like the station that the train is going to, and I'm not gonna, I don't have time to run back to monitor or watch playback most of the time. Right. So it's like, just sort of trusting that. But yeah, it is an interesting thing. Like, I think the imposter syndrome of it all is really interesting. And Slip was very interesting because I was directing for a good portion of the shoot naked, and so like I require
about that in between takes for like giving away or like notes, and you're naked. That's so funny.
I mean, they throw a robe on me, but a lot of it's like, I do like to direct from within the scene, like not stop. So I'll pause someone and have them and give them a direction while we're acting. And those scenes, like with Wit or with Umar in the first episode, like he's, going down on me, and I was giving him direction. Like I gave him the direction to be more generous while he was doing it. And he like turned like, I mean, he sort of perished in front of me, but I think it is those, especially in sex scenes, they're so sort of surreal and awkward, and sometimes it does take like some wild swing to like break the ice and make people feel more comfortable.
Totally. I mean, it is just so impressive to see that, because I feel like to put yourself in that position in a story about, orgasm loop wormhole, like, it's important, like, or, maybe not necessary, but like, I can see how valuable it is to be that vulnerable and to be naked in the show. And I feel like the last time I really saw that a ton in terms of a director doing that and putting themselves into it was with Lena Dunham and Girls. Totally. And it is it's crazy that that's still like radical, like I wish it wasn't like, so like, whoa, that's crazy. But it is really impressive and vulnerable. And I guess I, I have so many questions still, but in terms of that being a big icebreaker, you mentioned also like going into Slip with a little bit more of an intention to play, craft happening in between Band-Aid and this. Like, I assume it seems so natural that I assume that there's more improv in Band-Aid, or like kind of in that mumblecore way. Even maybe not. Maybe there's none at all. But did you find the room to play again in Slip? Like, it feels so specific and so controlled, and so, especially visually and with the music and with the sound design. But was there still room for ad-libbing? I feel like your character's so dry and just so in the moment that it felt so natural. And I guess just being the connective tissue with the two questions is being naked.
Can you improv naked? Well, it was interesting. I went from Band-Aid to The Craft, and then in quarantine made another film called How It Ends, which was like more improv. And I think from The Craft, I needed to do something like How It Ends, which was like diametrically opposed in terms of process. That was like super micro, like 3 crew members, and just like my friends and a lot of improv. And I think like Flip then was the natural extension from that, where there wasn't a ton of improv. I mean, Wit definitely did some like amazing improvising.
Yeah.
But I think I'm like, I'm always a little nervous to let things go entirely off the rails.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're the same. I'm like curious because I feel the same way with your films, where like my favorite films are ones that it seems like it's improvised, but it's mostly not, because the direction is so good and the script is so strong, and also I think that is like the mark of a great director, which I see in your films, is like that there is a sense of spaciousness in performance, but that it still feels like very muscular. And when I hear mumblecore, I always like want to die, because I really didn't like that movement. No, but and I think a lot of great filmmakers came out of that movement. But I think when that was happening, I like the idea of making something that feels sort of navel gazy or self-indulgent or lacking in intention in terms of
storytelling.
And storytelling is something that I try as a filmmaker to really like hold myself to a certain standard of. And anyway, but I am really interested, like, how much improvisation do you encourage, and are you like precious at all?
It's interesting. On both Shiva and Bottoms, I sort of went in with a cautiousness about improv. I think I was more open on Bottoms for sure. But on Shiva, actors are going to do what actors are going to do. And Holly Draper would not, like, she wouldn't go off the rails within a scene. She would come to me and be like, I'm going to say XYZ thing after here. And I'd be like, okay. And usually it wasn't a problem, except for if we were running, if we were needed to move quicker and if we were running low on time, versus Rachel would just ad lib. And I think that Rachel like in Shiva, I think that if she really felt in the moment and like it wasn't going to like derail the scene, I think that she would ad lib a bit. And then her and Molly Gordon, I wouldn't say completely improvised, but ad libbed quite a bit, because I think their chemistry needed to be, one in which they felt so natural with each other. They could just talk over each other. And it was less about, the awkward questions that, were being asked of them. They were just, in the moment. On Bottoms, I got advice from different directors that I would have assumed, used improv or been in movies where there's improv. And 2 of those people were Elizabeth Banks, who produced Bottoms, and Adam McKay. And they both kind of said a version of like, not be careful, but Adam said he does like, he makes sure he gets it within the first few takes, and then once he feels like he's really nailed it, then he lets the actors play. Yeah. And Liz said something like, be really specific about the improv you want, don't just be like, all right, go crazy. You know what I mean? But say like, oh, can you talk about this thing for a while and give examples of what you might do with whatever you're trying to, motivate in the scene. But Rachel and I had worked together so many times before, and they're so funny and they have such a good chemistry that they would within the first take go off. They weren't off the rails in terms, they always knew what the scene was and they were like on track. But I think as a first-time studio director and a first-time studio comedy director, I was like, stop. I was like, what is going on? Because I was getting nervous that I didn't know what the scene was, because I was like, what are they saying? This is not, I was looking at my slides being like, what? Like, where is this in the script? And I think then the other actors were like, can we improv this much? And I was like, guys, so it would be almost the opposite, where we would, by the end of it, I'd be like, can we just get one as scripted? And they'd be like, okay. They were just having fun, which is great. And that's all you can hope for, is that your actors feel that free. But I definitely at the beginning was quite anxious about how it was. And I feel like, the studio is watching being like, this is hilarious. And I was like, I'm just so afraid we're going to be in the edit and be like, what is going on in this scene? So,
but it is an interesting reversal, because I suppose as long as it doesn't eat up too much of your day, like to have someone improvise around the dialogue and find like all these different performance things in the improv and then move into written dialogue is sort of interesting.
That's true. Yeah, because some of it wouldn't just be like, oh, we're going to have so much fun and improvise. I think some of it was like, this is their way, especially for comedians. Like that was their way of finding their truth within the scene and finding their arc in the scene and how they get from point A to point B.
Totally.
Yeah. So much stuff.
So much to talk. I mean, we could talk forever, and I have 1,000 more questions. But do we? Maybe we each get one more.
Okay. Final cue.
Okay. Final cue.
Okay.
No pressure.
That's what's going. It's not like a. So, how do you explore female pleasure? I just like being punished for finally pursuing pleasure is like one of the best lines in Slip. Maybe this is my last question. Like how, circling back to the existentialist theme, like within your work, like, and in Band-Aid too, like I feel so much of your work centers around female experience, but doesn't make it about the plot isn't revolving around the pain of being a woman. They just like exist as women, like in Band-Aid, like when she like says she hates her body, and it's not like you need to have a story about an eating disorder in order to to have a realistic female character that you can relate to. And so I guess with Slip and directing that, like how did that sort of, like, in terms of everything that's encapsulated in that line, like of like the sort of self-hatred and the sort of denial of wanting to pursue pleasure as a woman, like how did that drive sort of, I don't know, directing that story and I don't know, crafting the arc for that character?
It's such a good question. I did watch a lot of like 90s erotica because I really wanted to make something that was erotic, like that wasn't showing sex, that was like fragmented or just for shock value. Like I wanted to really like turn people on, and that was an interesting challenge to do, like through a female gaze, like because like you said, like, well, we just have that gaze, so how much intentionality has to be behind directorial choices in subverting, like problematic tropes. But I think that it did come quite naturally, but I was very aware of like, of that focus being on the female orgasm, like, because I felt that of all the things I had seen that was missing, it was really a spotlight on a woman's pleasure, rather than sort of like an act, a sexy act where they are object rather than subject, and what I could do directorially to to sort of shift that. And I think it was about really living on me as a subject in those moments and not shying away from that, which of course plays into lots of self-loathing because it really means that I have to be very exposed. But I feel similarly about your work, and like I think it's so like you tackle such big questions around not just women's experience, but like you sort of satirize feminism while upholding it. And I think it's like the most brilliant thing that I've seen, in so many years. Like the way that you do that, both in Shiva Baby and Bottoms, like even just Shiva Baby, like it's a lens, like just that line, like it's so
doesn't make any
sense. Genius, and I think it is so brilliant to be able to make fun of it while promoting it, and that you do it so beautifully and so comedically. And I guess my question is, like when you are like framing these stories as a director, and like when you're talking to your actors about how they're portraying these like bold, brash women, like what are those conversations about getting that messaging out in a way that doesn't feel didactic or sort of cliched?
Totally. I think that honestly, like it comes from just knowing that your actors are down for the tone and for that criticism and for whatever it is that you're critiquing, or that they relate to the experience of the characters. And then you just kind of go from there. And like we talked about earlier, just sort of stay truthful to like whatever's going on in the scene, or whatever the character is dealing with. And I think it's nice to be reminded once in a while, especially with Bottoms, just because we take some risks here and there,
Yeah.
And it's nice to be reminded every once in a while that your actors are like down for it and see the critiques that you're doing and are there for it. But like you said, just like having the female gaze, makes it so that we end up criticizing feminism or self-love as a concept, or these things that feel so particular to our lives in our worlds, without really even objectively like realizing it, without being like, I want to tell a story where we're making fun of this. I think that like it's always after the fact where, Rachel's sort of saying this now, where she's like, I love that it's sort of unclear whether our movie is feminist or not. You know what I mean? And also, and Shiva, like with her character, like, directing her in a way where like she really believes that she's like a feminist, and is against like girl boss feminism and is like or whatever. So it always just like, we talked about, just goes back to the characters and like I think we just tried to like, with direct Io and Rachel in a way where like their only intention is to have sex with girls. Like they have no intention of doing a female solidarity situation. And yet every step of the way while we were making it, there was someone that would be like, oh, right, that's not what they're actually trying to do. Because that's just what you would think from like a group of young women gathering, is that they're like to honestly and sweetly be there with each other and do the good work of what, whatever, which isn't a bad thing at all. But we were like, no, these characters are not doing, they're saying they're doing that, but they're not. And so, like repeating myself, but it just goes back to their intentions and making sure they understand what they're doing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're so brilliant, and I'm so excited that we got to talk, and I hope we get to hang out IRL.
I would love that. This was like the beginning of many more conversations. I'm so grateful that you asked me to do this. I love talking to you, and I'm so glad to have met you in this way.
Me too. Thanks, Letterboxd.
Letterboxd for making this happen.